So all of our sessions are being recorded and they're available, they will become available for view on demand, as well as all the presentational materials used in all of our sessions. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. It can be, they can be related to the presentation itself, or if you have any kind of technical issues, myself and Saskia, our chapter president, who is the co-host, we will try to address any questions you have as soon as possible if they're in technical nature, and if they're linked to the presentation, we will address them at the end. We will have a short Q&A session. Also, before we start, because I'm sure there are some new people among you, a few words about our chapter. We are active in Luxembourg. We have been active in Luxembourg for several years, and we have over 200 members right now. We organize similar events on regular basis, at least one event per month, and we also organize other project management related activities and offer different volunteering and self-development opportunities within our chapter. Right now, as a director of the events team, I can say we welcome new volunteers for the events team, but I also know, for example, that in the communications team, we are looking for content creators and we have some other roles. So if you're interested, you can always reach out to us either at membership@pmi.lu or at volunteers@pmi.lu. We have several events also in the pipeline for 2021. Similar to this Agile Week, we are going to organize, let's say, a mini conference around the topics of resilience, uncertainty, and dealing. Yes, go ahead.
Lähdetään sitä
Saskia, can you just mute the participants?
etusivusta.
So we will have mini conference regarding building resilience. So it will be organizational resilience, but we also have speakers talking about how to personally deal with change, how to adapt to these times. And I think it's quite relevant because of the situation we are in now because of COVID. If you want to stay up to date and know when our events unfolding, or if you are interested in any other information about our chapter, the best way is to either visit our webpage or to follow up any of our social media accounts. Before we kick off the session, I would just like to again thank our sponsor, Intrasoft, and our partner, ALVISSION, who basically supported us in organizing and putting together this Agile Week. ALVISSION also has a special offer. So if you like the session, if you are interested in Discipline Agile and would like to go through a full-fledged training, they're offering 10% discount to all chapter members. So if you are already a chapter member, great. If not, you can join the chapter and you can still get the discount. And now I will leave you in the competent hands of our today's speaker, Mr. Daniel Gregon. He's organizational agility advisor and trainer and he has trained over 2,000 individuals, which means he has a lot of experience under his belt. So I'm sure you will enjoy the presentation. Daniel, I will stop sharing my screen and I leave it up to you.
Thank you, Alan. So let me just share my screen here. All right, can you see my, my presentation?
Yes, we can.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's morning here in Canada, but good afternoon, everyone. So very nice to be with you. A lot of people for a small chapter. It's amazing. So very, very honored to have a chance to chat with you for about 40-45 minutes. So basically, my talk is around Discipline Agile for experienced agilists. Now, I've been in close association with Discipline Agile for 7 years now, since 2014. I've contributed to the books, and I'm actually a Discipline Agile fellow. There's 2 of us in the world. So that means that Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons recognize in me the same level of expertise around Discipline Agile as they have. So that was quite an honor that they bestowed upon me. You know, I bothered and hounded them so much with questions and ideas that they finally did that so I would leave them alone, but it backfired. It made me worse. So I'm going to have a slightly, not different, but let's just say that my take on Discipline Agile is a bit more colorful than the official PMI version. The PMI bought Discipline Agile a year ago. You'll see what I mean in terms of just the way I express things. So what I'm going to bring you today is basically some very real stories, some very real experience around very advanced enterprise level topics around how Discipline Agile can be. I have been using the Discipline Agile toolkit. So without further ado, there's my introduction slide, which we shall skip. Alan has done that. So give you an idea, a quick agenda. So a hyperspeed overview of Discipline Agile. I know that many of you might have had that yesterday, but as I said, I have a slightly complementary and different view. So you'll see what I mean when you see that. Then I'm going to give you 3 real world sort of, I guess, after action reports, or share 3 world situations with you. One is around process tailoring, the very heart and soul of Disciplined Agile. One is around, just quickly, the lean agile governance that DA, I'm going to say DA from now on just to save time. So DA brings lean agile governance into play. We'll see what that is and how I've applied it. And one around real world strategy, as I've used goal question metric as opposed to OKRs. We'll get to that when we get to it. But questions I will take at the end, and I don't expect to take much more than about 40 minutes for the actual presentation. I would like to keep some time for questions, as I feel there might be a few. And you know, the questions is always where I get to interact with the audience a little bit. So let's keep some time for that at the end. So here we go. Here's the hyperspeed overview. So you may have seen the next 2 or 3 slides, but basically the official definition of DA, that it is a process decision toolkit that provides straightforward guidance to help people, teams, and organizations to streamline their processes in a context-sensitive manner. And it goes on to say where it does that. This definition, though, is kind of cold. So I'm going to show you visually what Disciplined Agile is in a minute. You may have seen this as well. There's a lot packed into this. This sort of big picture is all of DA basically, and you know, you have the foundational layer at the bottom, which is all the different life cycles. When I was introduced to Disciplined Agile, you know, actually in 2012, I read that first book that came out, and it wasn't until 2014 that I met Mark and Scott. But basically, Disciplined Agile DA was just this one little box here, DA, Disciplined Agile Delivery. It was only about software delivery. Over the years, it has grown to expand to the rest of the enterprise, right up to, you know, enterprise architecture and you know, finance, vendor management, legal, marketing, you name it. And but that is extremely important because, you know, in 1989 or 1993, when 1993 when we had only XP, and 1995 when Scrum came out, it was all about delivery, right? Even in the years 2000, but everything else became a blocker, right? Oh yeah, we're agile, but, and in fact, it can be illustrated very easily here. This is, you may have seen the value stream as expressed by DA, everything starting and ending with the customer. Look at the small, tiny amount of real estate on this image that the actual building of a consumable, let's call it software for lack, it doesn't have to be, but let's call it software. This was the original remit, the original area where agility would be able to play. So if you look at this, even going 100% faster here, you're only getting a 5% hit on your overall value stream. That's the reason that it had to move out of just software. It's no longer the constraint. I used to call it hurry up and wait. The business would have an idea. It would take 18 months for the business to actually bring that idea to fruition into requirements. Then all of a sudden it was an emergency in IT. So I mean, IT would do it in an urgent fashion and do sprints and XP and get it all done. And then because we didn't have DevOps and continuous integration pipelines, we would then wait 6 months before we could get it into production. So it was a ridiculous situation where wait for 18 months, go fast for 3 months, wait for 6 months. So that is not the constraint, right? The constraint is everywhere else. Now, process tailoring. Process tailoring is the heart and soul of DA, and you've probably seen these blade diagrams, these process blades as DA calls them. I don't expect you to be able to read much here. It's just to illustrate. This is where Discipline Agile brought a whole different approach to everything. It was first only in delivery, but it basically said, okay, for everything that you're doing when you're bringing business value to a customer, there are choices along the way. You're always working to objectives. And for each of those objectives, there are decision points and there are choices, right? So it all boils down to basically being aware of your options. I like this image because I like to think of each of these little, 3D generated little rods here could be a potential option. Now, I'm also certified in SAFe and Nexus and in Scrum, so I'm certified in all the frameworks, and I've used them all at times. So I'm not a zealot. I'm not dogmatic about anything. I do believe that there's a time and a place for every tool. In fact, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. However, the big difference between DA, and this is still part of my defining DA, the difference between DA and, for example, SAFe or Nexus or LESS or Scrum is that DA is not a framework, as we know. It's a way of making these choices. All it does is make these choices obvious. If we look at this again, notice the options here, right? So that's a lot of work. I'm going to show you how I've actually worked with teams to expose these options and decide. This is a lot of work. It's, oh my God, how are we going to decide all this? There's no time. We have to produce. We have to get things out the door. There's no time to go through all these things here. So that's where frameworks became popular, because this is what frameworks do. And the next slide is sort of I decided to take the if you remember WikiLeaks and the Panama Papers, when you're reading about them, all the documents look like this, right? So what the frameworks do is the frameworks makers, the people behind Scrum, the people behind SAFe, the people behind Nexus and Scrum at Scale, they're intelligent people. They know just as much as DA knows. They know about these options. But what they've chosen to do in order to make things simple and make the framework consumable is make some choices for you. The thing is, you never see this, right? They take the choices, they eliminate what they don't like, and make the decision before you, so that when the framework is presented to you, all of a sudden it's no longer this bewildering long list of options. It's nice and clean, all right? And Scrum, for all the good it has done in the world, is particularly prone to this, because Scrum says, well, basically, if you aren't accepting changes in future iterations, you're not doing Scrum properly, right? There is no option there. And the frameworks have done this to every single process blade in order to make it, again, seem consumable. And by the way, I've purposely made different choices here, so I'm not illustrating any specific framework or anything. It's just the idea here. So basically, yeah, it's okay to start with frameworks, but you're implementing practices without necessarily understanding why nor knowing what the other options were. That's the most terrifying thing for me. Across the world right now, there are tens of thousands of Agile transformations where people do not know what the other options were. And every time I've done process tailoring with teams, oh my God, you showed us options we didn't even know were options, right? That's because one size does not fit all. That has always been the mantra of Discipline Agile. Let me show you another way to understand how Discipline Agile is not a framework. And this one is going to be very visual. Here we have sort of a Stacy grime, right? Stacy diagram. We have simple things in terms of complexity and scope. We go to complicated, we go to complex and chaos. The frameworks or the approaches, everything from Scrum, Kanban, Lean Startup, and Waterfall, all have their place, right? If you find yourself in a simple context where you've done it many, many times, and the team knows what they're doing, and the technology is simple, and you've been using Waterfall and it works, why would you change that? Why would you want to impose the change tax of Agile on that team? Waterfall choices are perfectly within the realm of Discipline Agile. Discipline Agile, all it does is expose the choices of ways of doing basically, business solution development since ENIAC, since 1950, right? In fact, the first time I met Mark Lyon, I said, Mark, I could be doing Waterfall and still be completely within the remit of Discipline Agile. And he kind of looked at me, he said, you know what? I'd never thought of it that way, but you're right. All of these things, Kanban, are just choices in the overall picture of DA. And the same thing is true at scale. It's just the same picture, except now we're talking about Nexus, we're talking about SAFe, we're talking about less, Scrum at scale. But all the choices, these larger at scale frameworks are just collections of choices that have been made, pre-made, but they're all that you can take all the choices in Discipline Agile, and I can show you exactly which choices you need to make to recreate SAFe, basically, or to recreate Scrum at scale. The one that is a bit more difficult, there may be some in the audience who are familiar with less. Less is a fascinating sort of exception because it too is made of choices. And it's the closest to Discipline Agile in terms of its philosophy. It's almost not a framework, but it still is because it has Scrum in the name. So Scrum being the framework, it inherits the limitations of Scrum. But there are some really brilliant things that I really like in less. But all right, that's beside the subject. So that's for the first part. I just wanted to make sure that we really, really, really have everyone on the same page in terms of what exactly Discipline Agile is. Well, that's what it is. If you look at it this way, it's just the combination of everything we know about the options that we can take in delivering business solutions. It is not a framework and it is not prescriptive. So let's look at how does this work? How have I been doing this in the real world? How have I been able to convince clients to move away from what they feel is the certainty and the repeatability of a commercial framework, and have the courage and be crazy enough to want to create their own solution. So let me I'm going to show you some process tailoring workshop examples. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but what it basically looks like this. Let me choose, let's see here. I've got one like that and another one. All right, I'll start with, I've used many formats over the years. I'm going to make this bigger so you can see it.
We can see it well.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, it's going to expand, you see. So this was here. You'll recognize, and we're going to get this. I'm going to get to this in the governance part. The one thing that DA does have that no other Agile approach or philosophy has is 3 phases, well, 4 phases: inception, construction, transition, and ongoing, just to organize the work. So I would take a team, sit down with them, and we would start looking at these process goals. Now, for those of you familiar with the book Choose Your Wow, what I basically did here, the Choose Your Wow book didn't exist at the time, so I basically took all the process goals and recreated everything in this mind map. And what I do with the teams, basically, in several 2 to 3 hour sessions, is we sit down and we go, okay, here are the choices for form the team. Let's say form the team, and let's find one that has a lot of green and actions here. Okay, so I would say, well, here's the inception grand objective, the phase, this phase is inception. The objective is explore scope, and the decision point we're looking at now is explore the process. And here are your choices. In the past, people have done value stream maps, UML. They've done UML of different kinds, flow charts, data flow diagrams, and business process diagrams. So what I did with themes is, if we're doing it now and it's working, we're just going to reformat it into this yellow color. If it's something we're not doing, but we would like to do in the future, let's document it this way. Let's put it in green. Say, why would we like to do that? Well, we think we would add value. So what's the action item? So the action item, we would put an actionable thing that the team lead, the Scrum Master, whatever you want to call the person, the Agile facilitator, or anyone else, the coach, would need to make sure the team followed up on. And we would go on and on like this for hours, and there would be very frank discussions, right, about, well, why aren't we doing, why are we doing requirements when we could be doing a work item pool? Why are we doing this? So this was my first experiments with this, and it was okay, but quickly I found that the mind map format became sort of, if I can show you this, it started scaring people more than it, because these are just inception decisions, right? So I said, okay, well, the mind map is, yeah, it's okay, and we got what we needed out of it, but I continued to experiment. So basically, I then moved over to how else could we do this? And lo and behold, that favorite, I'm a project manager, right? Before I fell into the world of agility, I was a project manager. So I eventually came back to project managers' favorite tools, Microsoft Excel. Right? You can't keep a project manager in Excel separated very long, even one like myself who has discovered agility. But here, and this is an example in French, here we found the sweet spot, because then, obviously we could hide it like in the mind map, but also it was much simpler to use, and we could have long discussions. And here, what we have now is what we're doing is in yellow, and what we'd like to do is in green. And then we could get very detailed on the actions, on the comments, as much as we needed to. And the action items in this particular case, we actually created JIRA tickets describing as a user story the action that we would take in order to improve our choices on these particular items, right? So, for example, let me just take one example here where the team decided that they wanted to have better information radiators, and they would produce like elements of the JIRA dashboard that could be used for strategic communication. That in and of itself became a JIRA ticket for the team. So not only do we have, you all are familiar, if you've done agility, the notion that when you have a retrospective and you've decided as a team that something is important enough you have to act upon it, well, you should probably be making a user story out of that action and getting the product owner to put it into an upcoming sprint so that it isn't ignored. Well, that's what we actually were able to do here, is all these aspirational improvements to the ways of doing things that the GA process goals gave us in these sessions, in these very detailed sessions. We were able to transform and even transformation ticket. We called them transformation tickets. We had like 90 of them at one point, basically. And the other nice thing about using an open tool like Excel was if we needed like complementary information on the side, or we would, or just whatever we needed, we could put on the side. But this is look at the work we did with this particular team. And this wasn't even, by the way, this wasn't even a startup, fancy little startup company. This was with a department within the government of the province of Quebec. So this is, you would think that a government would be very non-agile, but they were very, very agile, very willing. Look at the work they were willing to put into this, right? So there's probably about 60 hours of work in here, discussing with the team, getting the actions, getting the action plans. So, you know, we started talking about refactoring. So we got little articles, and, you know, it just goes on and on. My point here is that if you look at this, someone would say, okay, well, wouldn't it be easier just to do SAFe or Scrum or something? Or this is the whole point. What we wind up with here, with the green and the action, is basically an entire way of doing things completely built by the people who will use this way of doing things, and completely transparent to everyone in the team, transparent to the stakeholders. Is it hard work? Yes, it's hard work, but it saves a lot of rework. It saves, I would say, for every hour you put into an exercise like this, you're saving 12 hours of work for the team, where everybody is like running around the chickens with no heads doing the wrong thing. So this is the magic of those DA process goal trees. So that is what I wanted to show you about that topic. But I will never stop. I do this with all my clients now. I say, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find your way of working. And it's going to be hard work, but at the end, you're going to wind up with something that fits your context, that has been developed by your people, that has been improved by your management, that is measurable by your executives, and that belongs to your organization. And in the end run, you know, even the people who initially sometimes would sort of resist this when they see what the results, basically, it's usually they usually come on board. So that was the first sort of real world example, process tailoring. The second example now is real world governance. And this is just one slide, but I want to explain to you how this one slide makes sure that, you know, with everything I just showed you, you could say, well, Daniel, you know, if all the teams in all the departments and even of a big company start doing that and wind up with different ways of doing things, that's chaos. So yes, I would answer you, it would be, if not for this. So DA provides a way of avoiding that chaos and provides a simple way where you can give each subdivision, each team, each product team, each area, you know, for example, much of my experience has been in very large financial institutions, 90,000 people. You know, there's a credit card section, there's a car loan section, there is a mortgage section, there is banking, there's, you name it, right? Each of these is a line of business, but they're all very different. So you can't do in insurance what you would do in banking, what you would do in brokerage. It's just very different regulations, for example. But you do need something at the top of the house, something at the enterprise project management office. Yes, I just did say PMO. PMOs continue to exist, and basically, and it's funny because this is also something I said to Morgan Scott. I said, you know, Discipline Agile is very PMO friendly. You should get to know the PMI. that was many years ago, and they sort of looked at me. The PMI, and the PMI is like, whoa, that's, you know, this was, you know, 5 years ago. Their mind wasn't there yet. But I told them, I said, no, you'd be surprised how close what you're doing is acceptable to, you know, to the PMI. Well, I was right. I didn't get any money out of it though, but at any rate, if you look at traditional and Discipline Agile, the one thing, this is the only slide where Discipline Agile actually recommends something very strongly, and that is you need these phases. See this inception phase here? The Agile community does it anyway. The Scrum community has done it anyway, against and over the objections of Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber. The Agile community calls this sprint zero. You may have heard that expression. I know I've taken 5 Scrum exams, 5 Scrum certifications over the last several years, and in every one there's a question about Scrum, sprint zero, and they just hammer the point home. There is no sprint zero in Scrum. It was invented by the community, therefore not good. It didn't come from on high, right? But the truth is there has to be a sprint zero because Scrum starts with a finished backlog. Where did that magically appear from? It comes from the time-honored project management practice of having an inception phase before actually going and building something. If you don't take time and decide what it is you're going to be building, you're like a squirrel running around looking for nuts in the backyard and forgetting where you put them. You're just, a long walk to nowhere after nowhere after nowhere. And this is why much agility fails, is because there is no vision. There has been no real sprint zero, no inception phase, right? That should yield. So long story short, D8 introduces 3 simple phases and a couple of very simple milestones. At the end of inception, you should have a vision, a shared stakeholder vision around what it is that this product or this project is. We used to call it a project charter in traditional. It's the same thing, except that it could be a bit more lightweight because we used to pack a lot into those project charters, right? It could be, but you need all the shareholders to agree to what it is you're building. Next, during execution, DA takes a definite approach that you need to eliminate risk before you build too much. So it says, well, the first thing you really should do, if it's something that you haven't done before, why don't you make sure that the architecture, now we're talking about business, basically technology business solutions here, software development in case of proven architecture. Why don't you make sure that all the architecture fits and works, even if it's only a walking skeleton? Because all too often in undisciplined agile, for lack of a better word, you start building right away, and at one point it's very easy to wind up into a technological dead end. So you eliminate that risk immediately, and afterwards the milestones are very simple, right? You have go and no go decisions at the end of every iteration if you're doing an agile approach. And in Kanban type style, well, then you could be basically doing it at the end of every month or whatever. And the transition phase, with CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, LinkedIn did 14 transitions since I said the word go, no go, right? So transition phases are getting smaller and smaller and smaller with modern development pipelines, but they're still there. And then at the end, you should have a delighted stakeholder, basically. So this is what keeps the chaos at bay. This is what gives you the freedom to have all those teams filling in all those Excels and all those mind maps and making all those decisions and getting to their own way of working, because you're going to be waiting for them as a PMO, a supporting PMO and Agile Center of Excellence with, well, 2 things, and I didn't have time to, I mentioned it a little bit in the next section. Everybody goes through the same phases. Everybody's subject to the same lightweight sort of milestones, and everybody should have the same categories of metrics. Metrics are very important. So real world strategy. So let's just now drill down from the strategy to implementation using something that Scott, for one, is a huge fan of, and that's goal, question, metric. A bit obscure goal, question, metric. It was overshadowed a lot by the resurgent popularity of OKR. Google made OKR famous again because it was being done in Intel by Andy Grove in the 1970s and 80s. So OKR, believe it or not, is very old, and it's not that good. It's only 2 factors. You've got an objective and a key result. And Scott really convinced me, and he discusses it briefly in this book, and also it's in the Choose Your Wow book as a choice, obviously. But OKR adds a question. So let me show you with a live demonstration what using OKR to get from strategy down to implementation looks like. Sorry, GQM. It's still only 6 o'clock in the morning. I might get my acronyms a bit mixed up this morning. So let's see here. Where was I? Here. So this is also actual real world with the client. All the stuff I'm showing you is real world with clients. I've just changed the names to protect the innocent. But basically, here's how a goal question metric works. This is a strategic plan of this organization. They had two main goals: be easy to do business with and be a great place to work. Let's unpack this. Be easy to do business with, right? So the overarching, now these are like super goals. So the overarching goal was adapt quickly to market expectations, improve time to value, and improve quality. Now this is where the question comes in. How lean, in order to adapt quickly to market expectations and be easy to do business with, let's ask ourselves some questions. How lean is our portfolio management? How are we prioritizing? And are customers seeing a difference? These questions will give you candidate metrics. So, for example, here, we could say, well, one way we could measure this is the percent of the budget allocated up front at the beginning of the fiscal year versus the percent that we actually allocate as a rolling wave during the year. Or the percent of budget allocated to long live stable teams versus projects and keep the light on. That will answer how lean is our portfolio management, because lean portfolio management is a way of adapting quickly to market expectations, which we've determined is one way to be easy to do business with. How are we prioritizing in order to adapt quickly? So here are three more candidate metrics. How about the number of projects or number of initiatives that were prioritized via economic prioritization? How about the trend in work of process as a number of concurrent things that we're doing at once? And how about how many projects have we stopped? That would be a good metric, because if we started looking at this and we wanted to adapt quickly to market expectations, if we're a regular organization, chances are we've got way more projects going than we should. So if we stop 17, that's probably a good metric showing us that we're well on our way to be easier to do business with, because we've actually done the things that need to be done at this level. And are customers seeing a difference? That's a great question. Are they? So customers, customer satisfaction. What's your net promoter score out of 10 that you're going to be going for? What's the average lead time from concept to value? Identify a target. In other words, how long does it take us? Hey, this would be a great idea for these types of customers. If it's like in the beginning of my talk and it takes you 18 months to have the idea, then you do a bit of agile in the middle and another 6 months to get it out to production. If it takes 3 years, your competitors have had 9 ideas since then. You're dead, right? Or increase the net promoter score. Again, identify a target. So you can see now that we can do this. Let's look at another one with be a great place to work now, which is a different set of questions, right? How do we attract the best employees? Have we adjusted our HR practices? You can say you're a great place to work, but you haven't adjusted your HR practices, right? How about the number of employees that are receiving team instead of individual compensation? How about the number of teams able to have a say in who gets hired into the team? Those are metrics that'll decide if you've adjusted your HR practices, which will inform you if you're on your way to attracting the best employees. How about keeping the best employees? Are we moving closer to long-lived and self-organizing teams? Right. So here's some more sort of metrics around, launch one team by June 1st. Number of teams, members fully dedicated. So make a long story short, I don't want to go through every one of these, but this is the power of goal question metric, which is something that was revealed to me as basically an option within the DA toolkit discussed in the books, and a perfect example of an advanced sort of technique that would never have come to my attention if it were not for Mark and Scott writing about it, talking about it, promoting it. I mean, I had to go back and find scholarly academic research on it. isn't much out there on goal. You know, you can find a ton of things in OKR, but there isn't that much out there on goal, question, and metric. But as you can see, it's also a bit of common sense as well. And the thing is, too, your metrics, you can change your types of metrics according to the situation you find yourself in and the question you're trying to ask. So let me just go back now to finally the presentation, and I do believe that so that was the live GQM presentation too. So I'm wrapping up. So I've showed you some very, advanced techniques, but why do we want to use the DA toolkit? Basically, because it contains everything, as we saw, but yet prescribes nothing, with the possible exception of, the governance model. But that's nothing compared to what it could be prescribing. What it is, basically, it's a forcing function. It forces you into critical thinking. And it's going to work with your culture rather than against it, because your culture will be the one doing the critical thinking. Your culture is you. Culture isn't something outside of you. And it fosters agency. It fosters, I like agency better than empowerment. Agency is when you actually are an actor who has her own strength, her own power in the system. I don't like empower because it sounds like something management can give and management can take away. So it fosters agency and therefore deep engagement. And there you have it, 46. I'm a minute over time. Questions? So we can open it up to questions now.
All right, thank you very much. Very. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I realized that was probably like drinking from a fire hose, as we like to say, but.
All right, let me just out of courtesy switch my camera back on. I have just a couple of questions, but I would like to encourage the audience, if they have any more, to still post them in the chat room. I have a question from Xavier. What is the time to market to implement discipline agile in a large company? And a follow-on question, what is worse, starting from scratch and implement DA, or switching from an at-scale framework like SAFe towards DA?
Yep. So let me start with the first type of question. Well, actually, they're the same question, but sort of from a different perspective. So what I have often encountered actually is there isn't really such a thing as implementing DA, and let me explain that in a way. You will always arrive, as a coach, as a consultant, you will always arrive, and if there has been any sort of agile transformation whatsoever, something will already be there. Someone will have brought in Scrum, someone will have brought in Kanban, someone will have brought in SAFe. They will have taken maybe Nexus and Scrum at scale have very small market shares, but I have encountered them. Most of the time you wind up in a situation where either SAFe or Scrum is already being practiced in-house. And that's fine. It's what you need to do then. What Discipline Agile then becomes is, it becomes a way of asking questions. It becomes the way that you can start tailoring the way that they're using these frameworks, and to get them to, the frameworks are like training wheels on a bicycle, right? It's fine. They got moving, they got onto the bike, and now they're moving. But you can take those wheels off, and everything that you saw, for example, in those process decisions, right? What would happen is that the process decisions already made will resemble you will notice that there's a pattern. It's like, the approaches that SAFe recommends will probably be in the yellow of your Excel, so to speak. You'll realize that you're trying to or attempting to do the things that SAFe recommends, but because and again, I certified in SAFe back in 2013 directly with Dean Leffingwell, and it was a fantastic week. And I came back all full of enthusiasm and tried to implement it where I was working at the time, only to realize my epiphany with SAFe was that if you look at the big picture, it's paradise for managers, because everything, what executive could resist that? It's perfect. Everything is planned out. Everyone has a role, everything, but it breaks down in the details, because unless everything has to interact exactly like on the big picture, otherwise it falls apart. And you wind up doing, yes, these practices, but the connection has been lost. And that's what I find, unfortunately, in every SAFe implementation I've come across, is that the connections, the wires have come on disconnected. So you can actually use the DA toolkit to see, well, how can I create new connections, or how can I get back to the intent that was there when folks decided to use SAFe or another framework. So excellent example is usually, for example, SAFe will say you need to use beyond budgeting. So you do no longer finance projects, you finance products. But nearly every large organization I've ever been still has powerful PMOs which finance projects, right? So right there, SAFe breaks right out of the box. So you have to find a way to live with that fact. And what are the practices that enable you to live with that fact? You have to find them that work within your organization. So at one point you have to, re-stitch and so be it SAFe, be it Scrum, be it even certain forms of, of Kanban, by asking yourself the questions that the DA toolkit will expose, and by looking at the options that the DA toolkit will expose, you will wind up ending up with, you started with a framework with all those options crossed out, and it's as if somebody gives you the options back. So the framework is still there, but you start making your own decisions. And at one point, you will still wind up with your own way of working. It's just that your starting point, rather than being from scratch, will have been from SAFe or from Scrum. And the first part of the question is time to implement. The larger the organization, and depending on industry, domain, country, amount of regulation, but even a small, medium-sized company, you won't get to any kind of organizational agility in less than 2 years, in my opinion. I mean, all this stuff can be understood in a couple of weeks, but it takes 2 years for the full effects to be felt. You do get incremental. So you start getting return on investment fairly soon. You start seeing the benefits of certain practices very soon. But 2 years is the minimum. And I know of clients now that have been trying for 13 years and still aren't there, because they start over and start over. It's like this is the 6th time Zion has been destroyed, like in the Matrix,
But basically what you're saying, that through whichever kind of agile transformation company already went through, it's actually good. It's a good fertile ground to bringing in disciplined agile, because if things are already working, that's great. If not, asking those questions will, let's say, shed light on it and then help you make the necessary adjustments, correct?
Exactly. You can't lose by asking questions and by looking for the truth. It's painful sometimes, and it goes against the politics sometimes, but in the end, the organization will be better off.
Okay. Yeah. So Saskia, do you want to continue with the questions?
Yeah, I think that. So then there was another question from Prabhakar. Very good exercise, and I believe this was about the
Excel chart.
Exactly, the figuring out your way of working in the team. Very good exercise. How often do you revisit these charts to move the team to the next agile level?
So that's actually a decision that the team can make themselves. Mm-hmm. But I would recommend minimum quarterly, so every 3 months. Just go quickly through it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
But that can be a 15-minute checkup.
Yeah.
Oh, look, this has changed, or that's changed, or we really, and sometimes events will force you back to it anyway. Mm-hmm. But as a recurring exercise, and by the way, there's a special prize for those who stay until the end. I will give you I'm going to provide you with that Excel, but free of all the I have a version of that in English, French, and German. Completely blank slate, if you like. There's
Okay.
Cool.
there's a
Thank you.
there's a condition you have to ask me for it in the LinkedIn message.
That's a good one.
And actually, I have a follow-up to this question. So basically, all the processes you have shown in the Excel file, you actually go through all of them in the inception and then only revisit them in the execution, correct?
Excellent question, and that reminds me that I didn't make that clear enough. You don't have to go through all of them in inception, actually, because some of them are construction, some of them are transition. You use the time-honored agile lean approach of last responsible moment.
Okay, makes sense.
So, the transition ones, the ongoing ones, the ways, the construction ones, you can wait. Actually, you need to do. Actually, there's a Pareto law that there's 5 or 6 of them that represent about 80% of the work at the beginning. That's explore scope and form a team, and the big ones, how you address changing stakeholder needs. So you spread this over time because it's hard work, and after 3 hours, the teams, everybody is like, they've had it for the day after 3 hours of this.
Okay. And another question. So maybe if it's confusing for people who are thinking about getting certified in Discipline Agile, if Discipline Agile is, let's say, a buffet table of all of these options and so on, and you choose your way of working and you adapt to the culture and everything else, what exactly or how do you test your knowledge about Discipline Agile, since, like you said, it's not a framework, so there's nothing specific you have to follow?
Yeah, in India, and I've been giving the courses for 6 years now. In the courses and in the certifications, what really comes across is, first of all, the Discipline Agile mindset, the principles, the promises. There's a very specific way of thinking that goes along with Discipline Agile. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. I was reading an article the other day. Discipline Agile instills a principle called enterprise awareness. I was reading an article by an Agile coach talking about risk, and the article was very good. And he said, the team has to identify their own risk, and then he gave a series of action points at the end and said, do this, do that. And one of his bullets was, avoid gatekeepers like the plague. I said, avoid gatekeepers like the plague. So you're saying that you still think it's 1986 and this little team should be making up their own risk management practices and trying to avoid interplay with the rest of the organization. Whereas my experience had been, for example, using Discipline Agile's approach of enterprise awareness. When I heard that one of my project teams was being audited, I went to them and asked that the auditor become a secondary team member and sit with us for 3 weeks. She did, and she came back saying that our Agile approach was the most auditable approach she'd ever seen. So working with, so that's one thing. So the principles, the mindset is different. And also, when you, yes, it's one thing to have a buffet, but what the certification does is it gives you explanations. We go through, what are the basics of Scrum? What are the basics of Kanban? What are the basics of the Agile Manifesto? What is the basics of, so you need to have an overview of the history of agility and what makes before you can change things, you need to understand them. And that's what the certification does. It gives you a basic understanding. So otherwise, you're just flying blind.
Okay. So we can say that, let's say in a learning curve, Discipline Agile comes at the end. In the beginning, you learn the rules, then you follow the rules, then you change the rule, and in the end, you break the rules. So that's what you do with Discipline Agile. You are, let's say, experienced enough to know what works, what doesn't work, and to find your own path. Yeah,
shu ha ri.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Wrong pronunciation, but yeah, exactly.
Okay. Unless we have more questions from the audience, Saskia, I would suggest we close up and we go back to our slides.
Yeah, I just have a quick yes or no question. Is the goal metric mind map part of the DA toolkit, Daniel? Is this an example of the toolkit?
No, but I can make it available.
Share it on request by LinkedIn?
By request by LinkedIn, I'll share it, yeah.
Cool. Okay, then back to Alan, because I think we need to close the session, right?
Exactly. Right. So again, big thank you to our sponsors and the event partner. and our chapter sponsors as well. And just to let you know, guys, so in few minutes, we have another session ongoing about applying Agile in European institutions, and I will copy paste the meeting invitation in the chat so you can directly join in to the second session, even if you're not registered. And this is the PDU code, and I will also copy paste it in the chat for your convenience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for a great session.
Always an honor and a pleasure.
Have a
So
good day.
the PDU and the invitation for the next session as well.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.